On 17th April 2023, you wrote an article called The Path to Capable Indian Firms. I want to unpack that article a little bit as we go along. Um, I want to start off with maybe if you can set some context as to like what are you thinking of when you're saying capable firm? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, just as the framing, I think a lot about firms. The journey of India to prosperity and greatness is very much about the journey to capable firms. Okay, so in a way, what is so great about the United States? The answer is Google and Meta and so on. These are the amazing organizations that invent new things, that run at very high levels of productivity, that create high quality jobs, and that's what makes a country great. So why is India poor? Because we don't have a whole bunch of high quality capable firms that are creating the right kinds of jobs for the people. And conversely, what does it mean for an India that is successful? What does it mean to be an India that is an advanced economy that looks more like South Korea and less like Pakistan? The answer is firms. So, high quality firms is the heart and soul of the development journey. And so, we've got to ask the question, what does a great firm look like? What does a capable firm look like? Okay, so that's my framing around the words capable firms. We want to have firms that have world class levels of productivity, and that is the same as participating in the global economy, competing in the global economy, clobbering competition from all over the world in export markets, and of course without export subsidies or anything. You got to do it on your own strengths, that is by purchasing labor and capital from all over the world. The firm should end up faring well all over the world, and that to me is a capable firm.
So it seems like for the way I'm understanding this, for you, the success of the country is very closely linked to the success of its private sector as well. And by private sector, I'm thinking of like companies in general. So for a country to succeed, your core argument seems to be that companies in that country have to succeed. And if I may say so, like the success of a country is kind of predicated or built on the foundation of successful companies. Is that fair?
Yes, there is only one recipe to be a successful advanced economy. Look at Japan, look at South Korea, look at Taiwan, look at Israel. A great country, a successful country, an advanced economy is only a country in which there are world class firms. There is no other way to get there. I mean, there was a way to try to get there, which was like the Soviet Union and Chinese communism. I mean, of course, we know those things don't work. So the whole attempt of government on top, of government driving the change of the economy, controlling labor and capital, we know that doesn't work. So that's not the way. Every advanced economy today is one in which there are very high levels of prosperity, and economics teaches us that the prosperity of the country is back to back with the productivity of its workers, right? You can only consume what you make. So if you want to consume a lot per person, you got to make a lot per person. Making per person is called productivity. So the only way you can be a prosperous, successful, advanced economy is if you have high productivity. And how is high productivity made? The answer is it is made in firms. Firms organize labor and capital and seek to achieve high levels of productivity. There is no way to get productivity as individuals. Each of us, we are subscale. It's organizations that make high levels of productivity. No individual gets to high levels of productivity. And that is why all roads lead to the firms. This is the centrality of the emergence of capable firms in the next 100 years of the Indian journey. In India, we dream that 100 years from now, 50 years from now, we will be an advanced economy. We will look more like Taiwan and less like Bangladesh. And the answer to that question lies critically around the emergence of capable firms.
So if I can push back on, will I'll park. We'll come back to productivity in a second, but before that, for your earlier point of how it's very essential for, let's say, a vibrant private sector for the necessity of a developed of like a of a developed country, if I may say so, is so like some counter examples I can think of, and let me know where I'm going wrong with this. Is when I look at, let's say, Nordic countries, where I think they have, instead of having like I don't know if there are world class firms coming out of Finland
There
or
are,
any
there
Nordic
are,
country per
there
se.
are Ericsson, Nokia, IKEA. Okay, just ponder the madness of it. IKEA is the largest furniture maker in the whole world. They built single stores in India, which cost 1,000 crore of capital. Okay, I mean, you may think making furniture is as old as mankind. IKEA has figured this out better than any other firm. IKEA is a better furniture company than any Indian furniture company. So, yes, the Nordic countries have achieved their prosperity through the private sector. The government taxes a lot of that. The government takes money away from private people. But first, the pizza has to be made. Only the private sector makes the pizza. And then the government can impose a tax GDP ratio on it, take some of that money away, spend it in various government issue ways. I admire many things about Sweden, but we should never lose sight. GDP is made by private people. It is very clever, very productive people in Sweden who make Ericsson. And Ericsson is an incredible Swedish achievement. There is no company in India to match Ericsson.
Fair enough. But I have a few other counterexamples which maybe you can comment on. Which is, my mind suddenly goes to the likes of Saudi Arabia and slash Qatar. Maybe I think Qatar has one of the highest per capita incomes in the world, and I may be off on this one, but again, I'm not able to recall any.
So there, it's an old idea in development that there's a distinction between income and development. What happens in resource-rich countries is there is a certain kind of unearned privilege that you happen to be sitting on a diamond mine, and so you make a lot of money out of those diamonds. And actually, the capabilities of the people are not there. And if you ask me, it's quite a terrible thing for any country to go into that route because, in a way, once that prosperity is achieved, it's very difficult to actually come out of that trap and emerge into a genuine country with where the people have high levels of knowledge and capability. There is a technical term for this. It is called the resource curse. Finding natural resources is a curse. So, every time some geologists go drilling in India, I pray to the good Lord, please, oh please, let's not find natural resources under the ground. The right way to become rich is going down the path of human capital. There are human beings in India. Let us learn how to get our shit together. And that is the pathway to building great firms. And that is the pathway to becoming a great country. Once again, I mean, you can have a lot of money, but you can be, pretty backward. Think of the regressive society all over the Middle East. There is male domination, there is horrible treatment of women. These are countries who can't make anything. They don't know how to make a washing machine. They just pull oil out of the ground, sell it abroad, and buy all kinds of things from abroad. The people don't have capabilities. Their societies are backward. Their societies have all the blight that we see in India with no hope in hell of getting out of it.
So, I I empathize with what you're saying, but in general, isn't so here how I'm thinking about this. I feel like it is better to be like a resource-rich nation, and I mean, I mean, this can go both ways. Like I'm thinking of Argentina as well. I think I think I'm not sure. I think Argentina also has like large reserves of oil or natural gas, but they have not done really well at all. I mean, I think that country's been a mess. But when I look at, let's say, Qatar for that, Qatar or Saudi for that matter, I feel like even though I sympathize that maybe the human capital is not that strong, but it's when you compare, it's much better to have like a lot of natural resource where you're already maybe you have
Uh,
wealth and
So
you're kind of
one,
rich. You
the two
develop.
parts. One is think about the future. Okay, as Ahmad Zaki Yamani once famously said, he was a Saudi oil minister. He said the Stone Age did not end because people ran out of stones. Okay, in similar ways, the oil age will come to an end, and then where will you be? If you haven't built people, you haven't built institutions, you haven't built freedom, you haven't built checks and balances, then where will you be when the natural resource runs out? And my
And
second simple
you can use
question will be,
that capital to, like, you can use the natural resource
but
capital to,
that's the difference between Saudi Arabia and Norway, between Qatar and Norway. When Norway and the UK found oil and gas in the North Sea, okay, they had the liberal democracy, they had the institutional quality in their society to use that money wisely. But all over the Middle East, we see ridiculous amounts of oil money that has frankly been squandered, and the people are more backward than ever. So in India, in Bangladesh, the regimes came under pressure because there was only one way for the country to get ahead, which is to foster the human capital, to foster a better society. Whereas once oil was found in the Middle East, all the incentives went away. On that same note, I would like you to ask elite Saudi woman that would you like to be an elite Saudi woman or would you like to be an elite Indian woman? And the answer, hands down, is that you'd like to be an elite Indian woman. The life of elite women in India is better. So no amount of money replaces that freedom. Freedom is a primordial thing. The greatest thing in the world is freedom. And the good life, the good society is one where people can do what they like, where the women can do what they like, where you are not crushed and controlled by the society and the state. And these things are all related. So, economic development, the journey to becoming an advanced economy, the journey to becoming like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Norway, Finland, Israel, is a journey of opening of the minds, of freeing the minds of people developing capabilities, of people pursuing their own ideas and their own dreams, and each person blossoming in a cantankerous way which reflects their own particularity rather than being crushed into a uniformity by the government and by the society.
so till now, I mean, we've made the case that for a country's success, it's important that its private sector be booming, or it has a well functioning private sector, and uh, by association, I mean companies do well in our country. So if I can extend that argument, um, so what does it take to build a capable firm or a successful company? Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the grand enchilada. This is the great question of economic development. That what were the pieces that got Israel across? What were the pieces that got South Korea across? And you know what inhibits India? That why did these things not quite work out as much in the Indian case? In a way, for me, this is the great question of my entire life. That I have endlessly thought about India. I have studied other countries, and I've just always asked this one puzzle: that why is India poor? Why are firms in India as weak, as unproductive as they are? There are a couple of ways of coming at this. One part of this is an elite question: that is there a capable intellectual and business capacity in the country that can even get started on the project of building complex firms. Okay, so for example, if you go to sub-Saharan Africa, there's a lot of equality. So you get low levels of human capability all across those countries, and there's a high equality. So everybody is in pretty bad shape. India was in a great position back at independence or before because there was lots of inequality. That while the averages were terrible, there was a tiny elite at the top which was actually outstanding. Okay, this is a country of Rabindranath Tagore and Ramanujan and C.V. Raman and Jamshedji Tata and so on. There was an upper end of the tail distribution where there were a few people with the capabilities who could then start organizing these firms, and you get going. It's a 10-man firm, it's a 100-man firm, it's a 1,000-man firm. The thing keeps growing and growing. So you think of it like crystal growing. So I don't know if you've had experience in chemistry or in physics, that you need a tiny seed of a crystal kept inside a solution, and the crystal grows. So around the seed of the crystal can grow and grow, accumulating mass from the rest of the solution. So India was in a relatively good place in terms of having that high inequality of human capital back in 1947. Okay, so in 1947, things were pretty terrible. India was a very poor country with very low capabilities. My favorite one line fact about India in 1947 is that this was a country with 6% or 7% women's literacy. Okay, so things were really, really bad in 1947. But India had that seed corn. It had a tiny elite of world class, of ridiculously high levels of capability. So if you think of Rabindranath Tagore, who won a Nobel Prize in Literature, bracket, for a book that he hand wrote in English. Okay, so as you may know the story, uh, Gitanjali was not translatable from Bengali. And so, for all practical purposes, he wrote a somewhat different book in English called Gitanjali, which won the Nobel Prize. So, what you have is a person who was sufficiently articulate in English that he was able to win a Nobel Prize in literature. You're top of the game. Similarly, think of C.V. Raman or Ramanujan, or think of J.R.D. Tata, sorry, Jamshedji Tata, operating in the UK, operating in India. These are people who, were top class by world standards and who were able to initiate the process of firm formation. So India has long had that tiny capable elite, which is up there, which is world class. And that's a great precondition for a development journey. So if you are sub-Saharan Africa where there is high equality, then you're in a lot of trouble, because who's going to learn technology, who's going to learn business, who's going to connect up the country into globalization, who's going to operate in advanced economies and bring activity back to India. You need that incredibly capable elite with knowledge of English, knowledge of business, knowledge of science and technology, ability to negotiate and contract with people all over the world, with the depth of human networks and human relationships all over the world. This is essential, and here India has been pretty decent. But the second part of the machinery that is required
So
is
sorry.
the
Before you get to the second point, I really want to push back on the first one, in the sense that so I think I have a little pessimistic view on this, and maybe I'm not very convinced. And please, you
yeah,
can let me know where I'm going wrong with my thinking as
yes,
well.
please. Yes, please.
In term, so one is on the outstanding elite of the private sector, and I have another comment on the public sector as well. So
Yeah,
on both terms, I'm not very convinced, in the sense that, so I feel the way I'm thinking about this is, I'm not very aware of the number of population. I think it was around 300 million, 400 million during 1947. I think it was around that ballpark. I may be off, but like, I mean, the way I think about this is like, in a population of 300 million, it is not surprising that you'll have like a few like entrepreneurial
I'll,
people.
I'll give you 300 million people in North Africa. Okay, it ain't working. So I'll show you so many developing countries which will add up to 3 billion people. Just the top end is not there. India was exceptional. Okay, to get a Ramanujan in India 100 years ago was out of the world. To get a Tagore in India was out of the world. To get a Nehru in India, to get a Gandhiji in India, this is out of the world. These are not normal standards of other poor countries. So no, even if you throw 300 million darts, you don't get that upper tail in many other poor countries.
Fair enough. So on the public sector side, the way I'm thinking about this is, even if I kind of grant that, this is really an outstanding elite, and not on the, these are people who are not normally outstanding, but they are extraordinary people in that sense.
Yeah,
But when I look at the record, and my recollection, I don't know if I'm off, is I think after 1947, India grew at about 3% for the next 3 decades.
yeah.
So I mean, I feel like it doesn't matter how much your IQ is or how smart you are. If that is the output of, I mean, if that is the outcome, then it doesn't really matter what your story is, or what
So, so
uh,
I done. Let me finish my story. I'm not thrilled about the Indian journey. Okay, many things went wrong. I'm just going step by step. That you need one checkbox, which is high inequality of human capital. Okay, it's a great asset to have, because then you've got a few people in a poor country who are actually world class, who are able to connect into globalization, who are able to read complex manuals in English, okay, who are able to understand science and technology, who are able to understand business, blah blah blah. Okay, India had those preconditions in a way that many others did not. Okay, and it did not. It doesn't suffice, because many things went wrong, and I was about to start telling you about the things that went wrong. So by and large, what went wrong in India was the uh, economic policy strategy, the economic development strategy, which started creeping in perhaps from about 1955 onwards and got worse and worse thereafter, which was a whole approach of state domination. Okay, India became a country where government controls everything, government bans many things that free people can do, and we got into a world where a great deal of rational activities of private people were banned by the government, and the government prevented people from doing interesting things, and by default the government was always there to say x can't be done. So people stopped thinking and innovating. What you want in a vibrant economy is that there should be clever people who are looking at customers and who are looking at technology and trying to think, what can I do better? In India, the successful recipe, the successful DNA has been look at the government, because the government will tell you what to do. By default, everything is banned. You're not allowed to think, you're not allowed to innovate. If you try to do something, the government will ban it. So why bother? Just wait for the government. The government will tell you everything. Once you start looking to the government, once we intellectually get used to state domination, when we look up to the government, when we expect the government to play a leadership role, then something fundamental in our brains gets switched off. So we lose 45 IQ points. And then suddenly everything becomes mediocre because now you're waiting for the government to tell you what to do. So the greatness of a society lies in its people. What we need is a self organizing society where the people are thinking, where the people are experimenting, the people are taking risks, the people are making mistakes, the people are paying for their mistakes, where you don't have a nanny state that tells you you can do this, you cannot do this. And by and large, the early development journey in India was exactly wrong. The principles, the philosophy, everything was wrong. Where we got into this worldview that the government will tell you what to do, the government will build companies, the government will make electricity, the government will ban this and ban that, the government will cut India off from the world. So free flows of capital will be blocked, free flows of people will be blocked, free flows of technology will be blocked, free flows of goods will be blocked, free flows of services will be blocked, free flows of ideas will be blocked. And so we became like this closed, insular, trapped community of people where the people were not thinking. The people were looking at each other and looking at the government and not inventing, creating, risk taking. And that is the story of how India stagnated. So I'm not at all of the camp that 3.5% growth was a good achievement. It had a terrible opportunity cost. India could have been a rich country by today if we had actually embraced concepts of freedom. Instead, we built a claustrophobic state system where the government controls our lives in myriad ways. We have normalized oppression. All of us don't even notice anymore. We assume that the government can ban this and the government can ban that. We've stopped expecting freedom in our everyday lives.
So, one aspect is people are important. Second aspect is government can either, if I mean, government has the ability to obstruct progress as well. So let's maybe get into both of those separately, maybe. So first of all, um, if we look at maybe so maybe we'll jump ahead a little ahead in the sense that if we talk about today, um, so let me set this up a little bit maybe. I think in the previous days, I've heard talk that people who would do higher education in India would generally prefer to like go abroad and maybe do PhDs and maybe work in the US or Europe or wherever they want to go. But ideally, I mean, the sentiment was that there are not many opportunities in India, or you could obviously get much better. You could get much better paid if you go abroad per se. Um, and I feel like that was the sentiment early on, or back in the day, whatever that means. But today, maybe in the last decade or so, I feel like that sentiment has kind of changed, where more people in India are looking to stay in India and maybe build in India, either work in India or just start companies in India. So for me, that is like a litmus test, or like or a data point which says that in that sense, like people have kind of embraced. One is the growth in India itself, and um, like people are more capable as well, like in their skills, and in the way they approach things per se. Is that a fair assessment, or how are you thinking about that?
Uh, it's a great question, and we should come at it from many directions. So, the first trivial fact I will say is that you take early South Africa, you take early Israel, you take early stage Taiwan, okay, you take any early stage country, all the same problems apply. Okay, by the way, when the United States was a developing country, the culture, the prosperity, the great attraction was the UK. Nobody wanted to be in some place with forests and Native Americans killing you and so on. There was a great sucking sound, and people would want to, go back to the UK. The UK was the seat of civilization, and the United States, as a developing country, would experience those difficulties. But in some ways, those who could would tend to leave. Okay, so that is a universal problem in economic development. Every country that has done economic development has faced this problem. Second, I completely reject any simple conception around degrees. Okay, degrees, credentials, credentialism has very little to do with achievements in a life and with human potential. Uh, but we live today, longevity has gone up. We live for a long, long time. By the time you are 30 or 40, almost everything that you know has been built by you, and it has nothing to do with your college. So I don't get excited about people from fancy degrees, fancy universities. uh, I'm a great believer in the actual learning process that people go through. People learn by doing. Learning by doing is important, and I will always encourage everyone. I will encourage you, take knowledge seriously, build a culture of non-purposive curiosity, always understand the world, take interest in the world. You have to read books, you have to be around clever people, you have to do complex things, you have to punch above your weight. That is the journey. The degrees don't matter. I mean, it's a tiny accident of life, that what do you do for the 4 years you spend from age 17 to age 21. It has very little to do with your actual knowledge and your actual capabilities. And that brings me to the next point, that learning by doing works best when people are in firms that are doing this complex capitalism that I described. That the actual learning happens inside the workplace. The actual learning happens as learning by doing. And now, once again, would you rather be a dirt poor, primitive country cut off from globalization? Or would you rather be inside a firm where there is greater challenge, greater complexity, because you are connected into globalization? Once again, the engagement into the outward universe, into the rest of the world, is the engine, is the driver of where knowledge comes from. Knowledge comes when you're a poor country, knowledge comes by connections into the world. We need to read books, read manuals, have the pressure. I have to ponder what the hell went wrong with this mic. Now, this mic is not made in India. This computer is not made in India. This Encaster is not made in India. These are all technologies that are happening from outside. And it is our pressing ourselves into these challenges about how we learn. That if you just stay inside India and you do nationalism, then your knowledge will be weak, your knowledge will be limited. Knowledge comes out of proximity to the challenges of producing in globally competitive contexts. It's the pressure of competing with a Taiwanese firm and an Israeli firm and a Norwegian firm that creates knowledge. People should have to do that struggle. An easy life is a terrible way of building knowledge, and that's like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. You got an easy life. You can be as stupid as you like. There's no pressure to do better because there is gas coming out from under the ground. Those kinds of things don't create the pressure of knowledge. And then I come to the problems of the Indian state, particularly in the last 10, 15 years. We've seen an accelerated departure by many rich people from India, and I think that's a bit of a tragedy. I think that there has been a bit of a sociological crisis in India. The Indian state has become much more populist. The state machinery is creating threats to the life, liberty, and happiness of rich people. And there are whether it is income tax or ED or CBI or regulators or whatever. It's just become unsafe to be in India. The rule of law is lacking, and there is a culture of populism, of hostility towards the elite, and that makes many people want to leave, and that's not wise. It's better for a country to retain its own capable people. One of the most harmful things about India is that people who succeed in India, who achieve some things in India, then choose to leave because it's too uncomfortable to be in India, to face a regulator in India, to face income tax in India, to face company law in India is just too much of a burden. So the Indian state and its coercive apparatus is shaping up as an important factor that is driving people who are actually our people, not people who left at school and college, but people who have built lives and careers here in at a later stage in their lives are thinking that I run an expropriation risk by being in India, or I can't be a meaningful thinking person in India when a regulator tells me every comma of what I have to do.
I want to go back to the degree comment, even though I think it might be a little out of scope, but still, I just want to pick that up if that's okay.
Yes.
So in the so I'm not very convinced with the degrees don't matter argument. So I'll tell you where I'm coming from, the way I'm thinking about this, and maybe you can let me know where I'm going wrong. So I sympathize with the argument that obviously people end up learning a lot by not only by themselves. Like I'm thinking of like software engineering, let's say programming as well. I think a lot of people learn programming by themselves rather than let's say attending classes in any college. And I think learning by doing also is an amazing thing where people learn more in internships than whatever book they might read. The application knowledge is much more enriching than let's say just
I just
consuming.
want to say both that today in the modern world, you can access the books, the internet lectures to learn stochastic calculus, and then you will land up in a financial derivatives research organization, and you will use that knowledge and you'll build it further. You need both. So you do need the foundations of probability calculus, stochastic calculus, and that's not something you're going to pick up on the job. So, we each of us, we should recognize that I have this gap, that I don't know stochastic calculus. But then you can learn that. You don't need a university to learn that. Today, all the resources are available. The internet is there. There are lectures, there are books, there are teaching materials, and so on. So, part one, you do need to learn stochastic calculus. And I will say, you know what? Actually, you can never learn stochastic calculus in a class. In a class, we become dumb. We go into a track. Somebody's telling us lecture by lecture. It's actually an inferior method of learning. When we learn by ourselves, we challenge ourselves, we ask questions. It's always a superior form of learning. Okay. And I say that as the good Indian child that has endlessly sat in lectures and courses and universities all my life. Today I'm saying that actually the good things are learned by yourself. They come from your heart. You learn something and then you turn around and apply it. That's the learning by doing. That is the path to knowledge.
I completely agree with you. But I feel like the where I feel like diverge with you is I feel like the system is set up in such a way that, and I may be off on the numbers here, but if I look at let's say any of the if I look at Apple, let's say, or Microsoft, or Amazon, or any of the large companies, but also companies in general, I feel like if you look at their distribution of let's say how much, like how many people do they hire from elite colleges, I think it would be a disproportionate amount. Plus, adding to that, I feel like so one area which I'm kind of familiar with, let's say in fields like artificial intelligence, let's say if you're doing deep learning, I think it becomes extremely difficult to even learn by doing. Like it becomes difficult to even enter the field if you do not have a PhD. Like I think I don't even know how many people, let's say in Google DeepMind or let's say in OpenAI, work who don't even have PhDs. I would be very surprised if the number was like a large number. So I feel, is that a fair thing where where not having a degree becomes a huge bottleneck for them to even start?
I wouldn't overstate it. So let me do it in two, three ways. Step one, Google is famous for having done research on their own HR practices, and they discovered that hiring from elite colleges doesn't help. Okay, so Google is famous for having published research where they find that just emphasizing the top schools is not that effective. You should look at the person and not at the schools. The second thing is that, don't get me wrong, I'm all for intellectual curiosity. I feel the greatest engine of life is intellectual curiosity. So I advise you to read, to think, to study, to do research, to write research papers, to build open source software on GitHub, to become part of the great projects of the world. but all this need have nothing to do with brand names. So the whole world is in the rat race of getting the brand name of a Louis Vuitton bag. And I'm saying, look at the bag, not the brand name. And that actually is the heart and soul of a life. And I'm saying that many people at age 21 have actually damaged their own minds and their own character by chasing and achieving a big brand name, because then they go soft. Whereas it is your job to stay hungry. And if you are intellectually curious, you live in the world of books. If you're always questioning and you apply a curious, questioning approach to your life, you will go far. Life is a 50-year journey, it's an 80-year journey. The least important thing in your life is the credentials. The most important thing in your life is your character. So I feel what we endlessly need to do with ourselves is to refine our character around concepts of non-purposive curiosity, that we should take interest in the world. The world is important, it is interesting. Okay, most of us are wasting our lives on Bollywood and cricket. We should be devoting our lives to intellectual pursuits. We should always and always demand out of ourselves that we think and talk and write at the level of the top intellectual elite of the world. And that is available to you, it is available to me, it is available to everybody. The only thing holding ourselves back is the way in which we have organized our culture. That the culture of credentialism, the culture of Bollywood and cricket, these are the deeply harmful things. People are just wasting their lives. You would have heard the old trope that great minds talk about ideas, medium minds talk about events, small minds talk about people. Okay, so I just recommend this to everybody. How many hours a day do you talk about people? Stop. Just talk about ideas. Okay, live in the world of ideas. Read books. Okay, play in the world of ideas. So if I may just go off on the side, Amit Verma and I have built a YouTube show. It's called Everything is Everything. Yeah. And here is a humorous depiction of what we are doing in Everything is Everything. This is a YouTube show where we will not help you to find a job. We will not help you to get a skill. We will not help you to crack an exam. We will not help you to get a practical, tangible objective. Okay. And that we say with pride is what this is all about. Actually, the greatest point of life is knowledge, is non-purposive knowledge, is curiosity, is the whole cultural package of taking interest in the world, of being interdisciplinary, of knowing many, many things, of being able to connect up knowledge from many separate things, of not being a narrow specialist, of having decades and decades and decades of penance, of sadhana in pursuit of knowledge. That is the greatest life of all. And actually, that life is open to you. It's open to me. It's open to everybody. It has nothing to do with being at MIT. It has nothing to do with having a PhD. It has nothing to do with having credentials. I mean, by the way, look, you write 3 research papers. There is a university that will give you a PhD. But don't view that as either necessary or sufficient. Your important war is inside your heart. Inside your heart, you need to refashion your character. It's a character question. That what is your life about? Why do you live on this world? What is your purpose in life? That is the story.
So I want to push the people argument a little further. In terms of so, is it fair to say that today, like, we don't have a people, like, we don't have a talent problem? Is that a fair argument? Like, so let me maybe take a step back, in the sense that I feel like, previously, or like, if you go back a generation, maybe we'd, because of either the infrastructure or the funding or various other reasons, we may not have had like talent, which was, which would stay in India, or which was operating in India. Do you think that problem today we do not have, where we have like talent in all areas, let's say space, or
So
high
I
end?
don't like the word talent. Okay, so people take some 7-year-old child that figured out how to do division unusually early, and they say, "Oh, this child is so talented, and this child can do maths." Okay, and I object to every bit of that. It's really the word talent misleads us. What matters is work. What matters is hard work. It is far more important to do work because then you can go anywhere. It is very dangerous that, oh, I'm so clever, I took the exam without studying and I did well at it. That's a very wrong culture. It's a very wrong approach because actually to go anywhere in life, it requires ridiculous amounts of hard work. We have to organize ourselves for hard work. We have to get out of that Bollywood and alcohol and cricket life because you're just squandering 100 hours a week. Instead, 100 hours a week should be devoted to the business of building character or building knowledge. And then anything is possible. So I want to tell you a story about chess. Okay, there was a time when India was pretty bad at chess, and there are some opportunities where breakthroughs happened. Basically, the early evolution of computers, and many rich kids in India managed to get a PC at home, managed to get a chess playing program at home, managed to get chess databases, and then of course there came the internet. And today on chess.com, every child in India is in the global mainstream and can compete with the global mainstream. Okay, so today India is a paradise. We are throwing up the most leading edge teenagers of the world. How did it happen? It's very limited. It's just a PC, internet access, chess.com. At that point, you're ready to take off. Now it's only you, it's your hard work. You have the grit and effort of fighting. Then it's don't use the word talent, it's just about effort. You put in the effort, everything will happen. You don't put the effort, nothing will happen. And this is true everywhere, okay? Are you in the world of software?
I was, yeah.
Hmm?
I was.
Okay, then I just want to say, look, open source software being developed through open collaborative frameworks like GitHub. Today, for me, it is as big as chess.com. Now the burden is on the person in India. Today, every person in India is welcome and able to participate in every global state-of-the-art project imaginable. Okay, you can become a contributor to the Linux kernel. You can't say that because I'm sitting in Bhubaneswar, I'm cut off from the world. That excuse doesn't work anymore. It was an issue in the olden days. Today, it's not an issue. So, today, it's about character. Find the effort, find the energy. Stop focusing on Bollywood and alcohol and cricket and instead start doing intellectual things. How many books are people reading every day? That is my crisis for India. So, India is a very backward country. India is a developing country because 21-year-old IIT graduates have very low levels of knowledge. They have not read books. They have a very weak culture. They don't understand the world of knowledge. That is India's crisis in the world of knowledge.
So I may regret this, but in the sense that the way I'm kind of thinking about this is like when you mentioned like talent does not really matter so much. I'm not very convinced, and the way I'm thinking about this is if I can go back to your earlier, you brought up Ramanujan as well, who was in India. Like I feel like I feel like I attribute much of his success to talent. I mean, I'm sure there were in his time, but also in the present day, where people who might have worked twice as hard as Ramanujan, but their output or their impact on the field
Look,
may not be
first of
proportional to.
all, please do not underestimate how much Ramanujan worked. Okay, so this is a guy with no village school who gets given a 19th century maths book and just figures it out for himself. Can you imagine how many hours he has broken his head on that problem? Okay, and my second comment to you is you have 100 years. Okay, so what are you waiting for? You have all the time in the world. Okay, so double quotes: a talented person will do something in 1,000 hours. Take 2,000 hours. What's the problem? You have time on your side. All of us have longevity on our side. The choke point is the guy who doesn't even start running. That if you are not in the everyday journey of knowledge, then you've not even begun. Then you're weak, you're backward. As I say, I am terrified about IIT students who are not reading books. Okay, there's this sense of entitlement that I'm so smart, I'm anyway going to get a job in McKinsey. Why should I bother investing in my knowledge? That is dangerous. So, in fact, so many people from the elite institutions are in deep trouble because they've got that cocky arrogance and the sense of entitlement that they're done. In fact, they've not even begun. At age 21, you know diddly squat. Your life has only begun.
Fair enough. So we touched on the people aspect. The other aspect that we discussed earlier was the government. So again, just maybe taking a step back. success of broadly success of the nation is kind of predicated on the success of companies. Again, broadly, people matter. What kind of people work in those companies also matter, and then the government, and the kind of government environment also matters. So we've kind of touched on the people aspect. Want to touch a little bit on the government aspect, and also want to connect that to people as well. um, so the way I'm thinking about this is like, um, obviously there are firms working independent of the government, let's say. I'm thinking of, let's say, Instagram or any other firm, which are just like commercial entities. But there are other organizations which work with the support of the government. The examples I'm thinking of is, recent semiconductor companies, let's say. I'm thinking of US examples, let's of like TSMC, which where I think the Biden administration gave them like a grant to, like, start a separate branch in the US to build a semiconductor. So that is one aspect, but also, if I may, the development of the people also is like parallel to like what the government can provide. Here I'm thinking of examples like the large Hadron Collider, if I'm not wrong, uh, uh, where they build these large physics simulators, or these physics these centers where researchers can make or design experiments. And for that, like, you need government support to maybe fund those. And it becomes very difficult, like, even if you're in India, if you don't have that infrastructure, it becomes very difficult to kind of even start researching those things. So here I feel like government plays that role. So two things: one is government's investment in, let's say, companies and strategic industries where they invest, maybe, or give incentives to invest for private companies. And second, on the educational part, where projects like large physics projects, where they fund the initial infrastructure so that people can study or make advancements in science. So any comments on those in general? Yeah.
So 99.999% of what happens in firms is not Large Hadron Colliders. Okay, so the 99.999% of activities in firms are modest amounts of technology. They are not the insane top end of the technology that you're describing. Remember, India is a very, very, very poor country, and our job for the next 50 years is to get up to being a middle country. You don't have to be at the top of the game. Okay, so our project is to get from $2,000-3,000 of per capita GDP to $20,000 of per capita GDP. We are nowhere near matching the United States, and we're not in that league. So let's stay on track. That our job in the next 50 years is to get a 10x of GDP, and that does not involve figuring out the Large Hadron Collider. Okay, so I find it useful to think at three levels. Okay, so level one is you want a government that does not terrorize its own people. Okay, so whether you think of the income tax or the GST or the CBI or the police or the courts or the regulators, the entire Indian government today is something scary for a private person, is something scary to be a business. I do not agree to be on the board of directors of most companies because of the amount of criminal provisions in the Indian Companies Act, where they'll put you into jail for any trivial thing. Okay, so the Indian government today has shaped up as a source of fear. So level one is stop scaring people. Okay, people in India are scared to do things because the government will destroy my life, the government will expropriate me, and the level of freedom and rule of law and safety from expropriation that is found in a normal liberal democracy is inadequate in India. So that is problem number one, which is don't worry so much about the government doing useful things, but get the government out of doing harmful things. The government in India is the great source of the reduction of human freedom, of the reduction of human safety, of the threat of expropriation, of the fear that I will work to build my wealth and the government will come and grab it, or some state personnel or some people with friends in the government will come and grab my wealth because they are able to. So that is the problem number one, which is just about basics of building laws that don't tell people what to do so that people are free. Okay, remember, freedom is what people do by themselves without the government coercing people to do things. So the laws should coerce people less, and there should be rule of law, which means that individuals in the government, whether a policeman or a tax officer or a regulatory employee or a judge, should not be able to scare a person, should not be able to take unlawful actions against a person. Okay, so this is the absolute basics. This adds up to the word safety. Okay, if I live in the UK, I am safe. The government does not intrude on my life. It doesn't tell me what to do. And yes, when there are laws that are violated, I will be prosecuted, but it will be done as per rule of law. There'll be checks and balances, there'll be due process, and no individual policeman or regulatory employee or taxman or judge can threaten me, can terrorize me, and unlawfully take away my wealth. Okay, so that is the first basic platform, that the Indian state is organized as a non rule of law, coercive project that reduces the freedom of the people. Our first project is a freedom movement to get the people out of the clutches of the government, whereby the people are free. Okay, and this is political freedom, economic freedom. There's a thousand dimensions to freedom. It is freedom from expropriation. It is freedom for single women to live and do as they like. Blah blah blah. Okay, every imaginable conception of freedom in India is inhibited by the Indian state. Then the level two of the Indian state is to actually do some public goods which will help. Okay, so the air in North India is pretty terrible, and the government can create the public goods of clean air. And the bad air of North India is something very depressing, and it destroys the health of lots of people. Many individuals, choose to walk away because they don't want to breathe that air day in and day out. I believe uh, breathing the air of North India in one winter is, roughly speaking, like smoking 100 cigarettes in that winter or some such thing. So these are public goods. If a government will do that, that would be pretty good. Okay, so instead of scaring the people of India and imposing fear and reducing the freedom of the people of India, if the government will actually do some public goods, that would be rather nice. Okay, and then the level three comes, that can the government become a part of the knowledge process and actually create institutions that foster the knowledge of India. Here, there are government-run universities, the IITs, the IIMs. I'm personally less than excited about the ability of the government to do this. So you have to always ask that what part of that is the capability and the signaling and the branding value of getting through the JEE, and what part of that is the value added of the campus. So it's not clear to me that the government universities have actually built themselves out to being really great universities by world standards. So again, that's like something for the deep future. Maybe 50 years from now, the Indian state will know how to do those things. But there's a hierarchy. The highest project is to improve freedom, to reduce arbitrary power, to reduce the threat of expropriation. Okay, the second level is to start doing some useful public goods. And maybe one day there can actually be contributions to knowledge. Okay, remember, Ramanujan and C.V. Raman did not come out of government investment. So you can have incredible levels of capability. The genius of Indian chess teenagers was not done by the government, it was done by the people. It was done by moms. Okay, Tiger moms made India the chess superpower. So I don't believe that you need these great institutions to be run by the government. It is the people, it is the fire in the people that makes a country great.
So this is where I'm a little. So if you can bridge my understanding here. So when you mention, people are scared to do things, and there might be threat or of expropriation or other things. So that is one aspect. But I'm so like when I look at the maybe mainstream news media, all like generally what I see is like a lot of startups being started and a lot of startups being funded. So I'm kind of like conflicted there, where um, on the one side, you're telling me people are scared to do things. On the other side, I'm reading people are starting.
You think about the seen and the unseen. What you see are some N people that chose to actually build a business. I'm seeing the 10N or 100N people who chose to not build a business. Okay, becoming an entrepreneur in India is scary. You have to deal with income tax. You have to deal with enforcement directorate. Think of the number of firms that organize themselves as a Singapore entity, and then they will do FDI into India rather than building an entity in India. Okay. Think of the number of people that are choosing to leave India. Okay. India is at Turkey or China levels of the proportion of rich people who are giving up and leaving the country. Okay, and I emphasize These are not students at age 17 or 21. These are people who have made their success in India and then decide that I don't want to deal with the Indian state and they choose to leave. So these are significant problems in India. The startup phenomenon catches newspapers and headlines, but it doesn't add up to economic significance. So you take all the money going into all the startups into India. Okay, so here's a crude argument. Suppose India produces one unicorn every month. Okay, so that's $1 billion every month, which is not what is happening, but let it be. Suppose there's one unicorn being produced every month, then that's 12 unicorns being produced every year. That's $12 billion of market cap. There is nothing. So it's completely trivial compared to the size and scale of the country. So these are feel good stories. They don't add up to the Indian economy.
If you don't mind me asking, you can feel free to skip this one, which is, so have you thought about leaving India at any point in your life?
It
Till
has
now?
always been a choice to me. I mean, I went abroad to do my PhD, and pretty much, yeah, there was another point where I'm very embarrassed to say I'd actually accepted an offer to work abroad, and I've always had the academic credentials of going abroad, so it has always been there, but not really. I mean, for me, this is the most interesting and exciting and important country in the world, and I am Indian. I want to be with my people. Mm, I know a lot about history and about other societies and cultures. It's no fun being a Russian emigre. So, over and over, there have been great waves of Russian intellectuals giving up on their disgusting state and leaving and living in Western Europe. And there is a fundamental sadness of being away from home. For me, this country is my home. So, whatever happens. There is a great man, D.T. Lakdawala, who was an economist, who told me long ago that your country is like your mother, so that's not a choice. I mean, you can dislike your mother as much as you want, but your country is your mother. So that's how I think.
In your article, Rethinking the Startup Economy, you write, quote, the excitement in the Indian startup world is overstated, close quote. Could you elaborate on this a little bit, please?
Yeah, fundamentally, it's what I just said that it's newsworthy that there are people starting these companies. It doesn't add up to economic significance. Okay, the size of the Indian economy is too large. India is a $2 trillion, $3 trillion economy. As I said, you get one unicorn every month, which is a ambitious number. It's $12 billion. It's nothing compared to $3 trillion of GDP. So it's nice. There are venture capitalists. There are young people starting firms. It's newsworthy, it makes the buzz, but it doesn't add up to significance. The bulk of the economy is in the standard big companies. So my views on the game have not changed. The game is to build, 1,000 or 5,000 great companies in India. A couple of these will be these new age startups. Say 50 or 100 out of them will be these new age startups that manage to reach till the IPO. Fundamentally, they are not an important or a critical part of the giant size of the Indian economy or the stock of the firms that need to rise to high levels of capability.
Another quote from your article, quote, investors are used to focusing on one decision, to invest or not to invest, and then handing over power to an autocratic CEO. They are used to hiring, quote, the best CEO with an emphasis on credentialism and track record. There is a better way. The choice of the CEO does not matter that much, but the design of the checks and balances surrounding the CEO matters a lot. More high quality firms will be built out of this approach of iterative refinement that harness many minds. Close quote. Um, so when I was reading this, like the thing that came what came to my mind was I was thinking of maybe these are the outlier cases where I was thinking about, say, Steve or Elon. I cannot imagine, or even I think Walt Disney as well. I cannot imagine these companies being what they are without, let's say, Steve on the Apple side, or Elon running Tesla and SpaceX. And even I think Jeff also is another example where I cannot imagine Amazon without Jeff dearly willing it to its existence, and making it reach where it is today. I was thinking about in those terms. Is that a fair way to think about it? Like, what do you think?
So first of all, you should not underestimate the uh, amazing United States environment, these individuals are surrounded and buffeted by incentives, advice, advisors, etc. So it's a very high quality environment in which many inputs come. They are not isolated individuals, whereas in India we tend to have much more isolated individuals because that environment is lacking. And I'm partly about that kind of thing. My second comment is that for every one autocratic leader, concentrated power that manages to make it to success, there are 99 who do not. Because uh, one person's decisions without checks and balances are likely to be wrong. And then you're wasting that knowledge, that talent, that capital, that opportunity. Whereas it's better to have many minds. Okay, so my fundamental thesis is that the world is infinitely complex. Nobody understands the world. You don't understand the world. I don't understand the world. All of us are wrong. The cult of the great leader is a very harmful thing because now suddenly everybody becomes deferential and they say, oh, this guy is so brilliant. And then that guy is given power. But that guy is just a frail bloke. He's like you and me. He's no better than you and me. And then too much is made of that person's knowledge and understanding and insight. And then decisions are made which screw up the organization. So now there's random dumb luck, as you said. If you throw 300 million darts, there'll be a couple in the upper tier. So I claim that we are wasting a lot of companies. We're wasting a lot of CEOs. We're wasting a lot of capital because of our cultural mistake. Just like I have argued about a cultural mistake around credentialism. I think we are way too reverential about IIT guys. In similar fashion, I feel we are way too reverential around CEOs. CEOs are not different, they're just like you and me. And nobody understands the world. So when we are reverential about CEOs and we look up to them and oh, you will do whatever you like and you are right, you are so great because you made 1,000 crore rupees, then we are actually wasting those companies and those very CEOs because they will make mistakes. Okay, it is in the nature of the world. The world is too complicated. Nobody understands the world. Where better answers come is out of a process of debate, discussion, dispersion of power, check and balance. You and I need to be surrounded by 20 people who will tell us that we are full of it. And only then we'll get better. If we are admired, if we are given power on a platter, then we will go crazy and we will make mistakes. So now by dumb luck, it'll always be that at random somebody made some decisions which exposed worked out right. Do you know the famous idea of a newsletter scam in stock market investment? There is a famous idea called a newsletter scam. Okay, let me describe it to you. uh, on day one, you and I, we're going to invent 16 investment newsletters. Okay, we give them all different names, so it won't look like it's you and me. Okay, so we will sufficiently disguise the origins, but we will start 16 different newsletters. In 8 of them, we will actively scream, buy Nifty, buy Nifty, India is going to be great, macroeconomic revolution, PLI is going to ignite an export boom from India, blah, blah, blah. We'll do all the positive rara. Okay, and in the other 8 newsletters, we will do doom and gloom, doom and gloom. Oh my God, it's not going to work. All hell is going to break loose. Okay, at the end of 1 year, we will know, right? Either we were right or we were wrong. Either Nifty will go up by a lot or Nifty will go down by a lot. So, 8 newsletters called it wrong. We'll shut them down. Okay, now we are holding 8 newsletters that called it correctly for 1 year. Okay, now we do the second year. Once again, in 4 newsletters, we will scream all nice propaganda and rara. And in 4 newsletters, we will scream doom and gloom. Second year goes by, we'll shut down 4. Now we'll have 2 newsletters. You get my point. At the end, by dumb luck, if you start with 16, at the end of 4 years, you get one that looks like some genius. Wow, you're so great. For 4 years running, you made the right calls, you twisted, you turned. In 1 year, it went up, in 1 year, when you went down. But this great leader, he got it right. So, when you have thousands of startups, by dumb luck, a couple of them are going to make good choices. It doesn't mean that they're brilliant people, it's just dumb luck.
So as you can clearly see, I think I'm struggling to like kind of accept that.
So
Also,
there
when
are
you
two
mentioned,
parts to the proposition that what we see as so-called great man outcomes are the outcome of a process with survivorship bias. Okay, there is supposed to be 50,000 startups in India, so inevitably 50 of them are going to look good by pure dumb luck. That if every decision of every startup was made by tossing a coin, you would get 50 that will look amazingly good after 4 years. And my second proposition is that the world is an impossibly complicated place. Nobody knows the answers. You don't know the answers. I don't know the answers. Jeff Bezos doesn't know the answers. So if we just give power to one guy, then they'll make more mistakes and they'll screw up their own life. If we surround it with institutions and culture and people so that there is debate, disagreement, checks and balances, less ability to roll the dice on crazy ideas, then we will actually use the raw human capabilities and capital better. We will waste a smaller number of companies. Right now in India, these 20-year-olds are given power and then typically within 1 or 2 years, they crash the car. Okay, that's just a waste of money. It's a waste of their lives.
my final comment on this, and I promise I'll move on. I can't keep this to myself. In the sense, uh, what I'm struggling to understand, the iPhone couldn't like the production and the invention of the iPhone cannot be like a process of dumb luck, right? Like that's where I'm like kind of struggling to understand that whole.
There's so much invention and innovation that has happened all through human history. This is not unique. Okay, the greatest software idea of all, namely Unix, was born out of a large team in Bell Labs. I mean, yes, Ken Thompson is a key player of that. He brought design philosophy. But again, Ken Thompson was not an autocratic leader. He was not a great man. He was surrounded by Dennis Ritchie and Rob Pike and so many other wonderful people. They all talk to each other. It is under conditions of low power and debate and discussion that you get all these greatest advances. So, no, I do not buy the great man theory. And by the way, Steve Jobs was surrounded by people and debate and disagreement and was kicked around by a board of directors. Remember, he was once sacked by his own board of directors from Apple. Okay, things like that. That is what a healthy institutional environment is. So I claim that we in India have got this wrong, that we are reverential about the great man, and that is wrong. We've got to always think of you and I need to bring each other down 1 or 2 pegs. You're a regular guy, I'm a regular guy. We're just frail, stupid humans. And every now and then we'll get an idea, and it is the people that surround us who will either pour oxygen on our uh, good ideas or help to shoot down our bad ideas. And we have to refine our ideas. We should have to argue about it with each other. Only then ideas should get turned into action. It's a better world. If you're a lonely, isolated, solitary CEO, my condolences because you're just going to blow up.
Um, so moving away from maybe discussion of CEO per se, um, so this is regarding um, a little bit of geopolitical tensions. I'm talking about specific case of China and India, if you don't mind. Um, in terms of like, so one way I'm thinking about this is um, the Sequoia split as well. Sequoia split. Sequoia is running like multiple venture firms in different countries, but now they've decided to split because of various geopolitical reasons. But also there is another discussion I feel where of this China plus one strategy, where people because of various reasons are pulling away from China due to various reasons, and they are looking for the next either manufacturing hub or um, other place where they can go to where um, the tensions or the things that they might face in China they may not face. Um, so any implication of that for Indian firms or any thoughts on that in general?
So I think that when global investors lost a lot of money in China and Russia, there was a bit of a turning point. So I have written an article about this, which is called "The Third Globalization." Okay, just find it. Google for Ajay Shah Third Globalization. I feel that after the fall of the USSR in 1989, people became excessively optimistic about the political system of various countries, and the business community thought, "Look, you don't need to worry about all this politics and state and all that, and just give it time and everybody will become a nice, clean, liberal democracy. There will be high levels of freedom." Vast amounts of money have been lost by global investors in China and Russia. And I think that has sent out a new message saying, You need to ask questions about the country before you get invested. You need to think more about the dangers associated with an authoritarian country. Many things can go wrong in an authoritarian country. Maybe some mad Putin will choose to invade Ukraine. Maybe some mad Xi Jinping will shut down an tech industry. Okay. Again, it's the same thing what we were talking about. Xi Jinping has power. That's all. That's what's wrong. Xi Jinping is a strong leader. That's what's wrong. Because every strong leader will make mistakes. When you don't have checks and balances, then crazy things will happen. And that can be pretty disruptive and can mess up a country. So, the extent to which a country has actually found its liberal democracy with an environment of checks and balances, these are now seen as more important issues than was the case many years ago.
In one of the articles you write, quote, roughly speaking, good companies export and the best companies do FDI, foreign direct investment. Could you elaborate on this a little bit, please?
There are many ways in which internationalization happens. So you could be a company, at first you're completely autarkic, so you live only inside the country. You're buying inputs in India, you're buying technology in India, your shareholders are in India, your debt is in India, your customers are in India, your employees are Indian. Okay, that's an autarkic company. One by one, various modes of internationalization switch on. Okay, maybe you'll get foreign employees, maybe you'll be an exporter, maybe you'll build a company in Bangladesh, maybe you'll build a company in Japan. Okay, maybe you'll start using foreign capital goods, maybe you'll start using foreign raw materials, maybe you will have foreign shareholders, and so on. So there are many modes of internationalization. And then economists have applied themselves to these beautiful questions, that what are the causes and the consequences of each of these modes of internationalization? Okay. And there's one beautiful body of knowledge which teaches us that there is a sorting by productivity. And for right now, just take my word for it. I'm not giving you the argument about why this is the case, but I'm just telling you that this is by and large the case with some exceptions. There is a sorting by productivity, and the lowest quality firms are those that are purely domestic. Okay, the higher productivity firms do exporting, and the highest productivity firms go abroad and do FDI. The best firms go out of the country and build a company, whether in Bangladesh or in the UK. Okay, so internationalization is deeply connected to firm productivity. When you become a capable firm, you will do exporting, you will do FDI. When you see a purely domestic firm, in your mind you should be thinking that this is a relatively low productivity firm.
When I'm thinking about competition, I'm thinking about there are two ways I'm thinking about this. One is interstate competition. By that I mean, uh, if I was coming up with a product, um, either I can ship the same product to all the states together, or maybe tailor it to like a different state's either culture or its needs or whatever. So that is one aspect I'm thinking of, like competition within between states. But another way of competition is competition between countries. An example would be like, let's say, social networking, or one example I can think of is short.
Can I just, I want to worry about the terms you're using. There is no competition between countries, there's competition between firms. India is not Infosys, and the Indian state is not Infosys. So, we in India tend to mix up these three things. So, it's important to always completely separate them out. There is Infosys, it's got a bunch of shareholders, a board of directors, and a management team. Then there is the Indian society, which is you and me and everybody in India. And there is the Indian state, which is a community that has achieved and maintains a monopoly of physical violence on the territory of India. These are three separate units. The Indian state is not doing anything other than being the ruling class in India. Infosys is building a world class company, and Infosys is different from the Indian society. So there are three different things, and keep them separate in your mind. Never conflate a state and the society.
My apologies. I don't think I don't think I articulated that well. So going back to the state example, what I was thinking of was not when I meant competition between states. I was thinking of like for a product. Let's say one example would be Haldiram's or Kurkure, where they might have some flavor for, let's say, South Indian states, and another maybe for. So it's a single product, but instead of selling the same product nationwide, they might have regional preferences. So that's one aspect of thinking about this. Another, I'll maybe give a software example. International firms competing in India. After TikTok ban, there were multiple short form video apps that were, that emerged out of India. I think ShareChat is one of them, and Moj is also another of them. So this is competition between, let's say, Instagram and Facebook versus, let's say, Indian short form video apps. Um, so, any comments or any thoughts on these dynamics where you have products not only coming out of India but also being competing against international markets as well. Just to maybe push this, I'm thinking of, let's say, Amazon versus Reliance, or something like that. So yeah, any um, general thoughts on that?
When an Indian company competes against an overseas company operating in India, there is often a problem around the entire machinery of the Indian state. Uh, the entire non-rule of law story that I told you about, the fears about how the Indian government will behave. So look at the way the Indian state pretty much tripped up Vodafone. Okay, so if you're a foreign company operating in India, it can be quite dangerous. And generally, Indian companies are better embedded into the Indian state and are able to manage this political environment better and get better treatment. So that is one dimension of competing within India, which is again my way of saying that if you're really such a good firm, you got to be abroad. Okay, good firms do exports, and the best firms do FDI. Operating within India is a low bar. Okay, the best firms, the highest productivity firms, would generally not be limited to only operating in India. So the other independent thing that I feel we should think about is that India is a very large country. It's a very, very diverse country. It's a very heterogeneous country. There is more variation within India than there is variation within Europe. Okay, so the richest parts of Europe divided by the poorest parts of Europe is way more than the richest parts of India divided by the poorest parts of India. And while English is a lingua franca that connects up the Indian elite, once you get out of the top 5% or top 10% of the population, there is not even that lingua franca, and languages are highly diverse all over India. So I feel that building a national company is as hard in India, that is, building a company that operates all over India, is as hard, if not more, as building a company that operates all over the European Union. So if you were going to operate all over the European Union, you would need to understand Polish preferences and Italian preferences and Portuguese preferences and so on. So the way to operate in Portugal is different from the way to operate in Sweden. You have to adapt your processes. You can't just say, I have one big monolithic idea, this is what I do, and I will only do one thing. Then, yeah, very well, you can operate all over India and you will have a certain limited amount of success. So, single monolithic companies who are controlled from one headquarters and operate all over the country will do badly. The companies that try to operate all over India will do better when they have a much greater level of decentralization, where the operations in Kerala are controlled locally in Kerala and they figure out what is the market in Kerala and they figure out how to win and compete in the market for Kerala. And the market for Bihar is completely different and they will operate locally and they'll figure it out. So that's a deep insight into India, which is it's good to think in a more federal way. And central control generally works poorly.
So on the decentralization part, the counter examples that come to my mind are like Apple and Coca-Cola, where they have like one product. Are those Do you view those as outliers, or
No, that's
um,
a limited market share. So, how much is Apple's market share in Bihar? Zero. Okay. So, if you actually gave the leadership for Apple Bihar a say, they would imagine a different suite of products and they would drive gain of market share. So, this is the arrogance of the modern world that look, I'm making a lot of money and I'm satisfied with that. Apple is almost primarily a United States company. They fare poorly in the rest of the world compared to how they fare in the United States. Their DNA is wired to the US consumer. They don't deeply understand consumers all over the world. Okay, same with Coca Cola. How much do you think Coca Cola sells in Kerala or in Bihar? Maybe if you understood the Indian market deeply, you would go put more jeera and limbu into your drink instead of trying to offer one single product all over the world.
Fair enough. Um,
What state do you live in?
I live in Karnataka.
Okay. Have you encountered something called Nannari?
No, I don't know
So
what that is.
Nannari syrup is primarily in Tamil Nadu and Kerala, and it's a unique, beautiful taste of a drink. So product development in India should use these things.
Okay, I'll check it out after the podcast for sure. Um, want to ask you about funding. So the way I'm thinking about this is, again, my understanding from this from about this is mostly from the mainstream press. Um, there has been a lot of US investment or investment in general from various countries in startups in India, or maybe in general as well. I The way I'm thinking about this is in general, it's a good thing. Is that a fair way to think about this? Like a lot of investment from different countries into Indian markets.
Actions of consenting adults are a good thing.